um
Sorry.
that's their word, right? Uh-oh, you're just now recording.
I know, I just remembered it. Sorry. Somebody always do that, but anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so I was just talking about the Stop Southeast Supply Enhancement Project and T15, two of the gas build-outs thanks to Duke and Dominion, and now Enbridge coming with the Mariah Energy Center or whatever. But I'll put information in there for you to take action if you haven't already, and then just share it with others. And connected to that, the awesome Lisa Sorg that many of you know, she lives in Durham, and she used to work for NC Newsline, and now she works for Inside Climate News. So we're getting national attention to a lot of our things that we're fighting here in North Carolina. But she has a wonderful article called "A Family of Beekeepers Could Lose Their Hives Because of Massive Pipeline Expansion." And that's basically because of SEEP. It's kind of like, it's Transco William Pipeline, but we call it, and for short, the Southeast Supply, SEEP, whatever. Okay. And then I predict Karen and Cheryl will be talking about the devastation from Helene pretty soon. I know that's on a lot of our minds. I'm going to include also an article by Anna Jane Joyner, who used to live in Western North Carolina, that some of you might know. Helene destroyed my hometown. I don't want climate change stories of false hope. It's a really beautiful article. I will include all that. Then I'll pass it on to the next person.
I'm going to take on, because Cheryl's overwhelmed today. So I'm Karen Willie. I'm in Asheville along with Cheryl. We're a month out. We're trying to regroup. And so we were, before the storm, having a monthly happy hour and a monthly climate cafe. And that's all on hold because the places we were doing are gone, where we were meeting. So it's been really difficult driving around town and just seeing the devastation. Fortunately, Cheryl and I, our homes are okay. Rosemary, we lost our third cohort member because her rental is not okay, and she has decided to move from Asheville, so and from North Carolina. So we're going to be missing her on our in our working group. She was the co-facilitator. I will put in the chat if anybody's interested. I've got a from Cheryl, thank you, Cheryl, a list of organizations that if you want to donate. The Beloved Asheville is amazing if you want to pick just one. So with that, I will turn it over to our host.
Okay, thank you guys for the updates. I just want to take a minute to talk about how we decided on this topic for our October roundtable. As I said before, I work with some of these other people in that triad Medicine Peace Coalition group. And happy to see you all on the call. So in September, some of us from our Triad Third Act group attended a climate fresque, which is kind of an interactive game started in France. We have a bunch of cards with pictures that are things like transportation, increased carbon emissions, agriculture, melting ice caps, et cetera, et cetera. And you work with other people there to determine the cause and effect. Like for 3 hours, you get these, every half hour, you get another like 10 cards, and you're going through them and working with people to put them and determine what's cause and effect. That's really pretty intense. And then at the end, you begin to draw lines between all these factors and see how everything is so interconnected. And when we completed the fresque, the final two cards were climate, refugees, and war. And that was, for me, was like, wow. So it is clear that militarism and climate change are the biggest threats to our planet right now. And it's important for us to see how they're connected. So I was really excited to learn from Lewis, I think it was Lewis Pitts, who was one of our Triad Veterans for Peace Coalition, that there was a Climate and Militarism project with Veterans for Peace. And we were able to connect with them and get our speaker for tonight. Our speaker this evening is Vince Dionich. He's from Oakland, California. He's a Vietnam veteran and has been active in Veterans for Peace for many years. He is and has been active in several groups, as he told you, addressing the climate crisis. He's co-founder of the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. He has agreed to stay on a little longer after 7:30 if there are people who want to continue the conversation. And I'm going to turn it over to Vince now.
Thank you, Marcia. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to do a slide presentation, which I've been asked to keep shorter than I normally do. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, we did get through our intros and stuff a little quicker, so you have
Okay.
probably more than half an hour. So
But we do want to have time for
have
people
time for questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
discussion. So
More than 15 minutes anyway.
yeah.
So you should see our logo up there. Whoops. I got a tricky mouse. Like I said, I'm from the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. We've been going on a few years. Seems like some of you are familiar with Veterans for Peace, but maybe not everybody. And this is the Veterans for Peace statement of purpose, shortened a lot. We want to try to increase, and we're mainly an organization in the United States, but we have several international chapters, and we have what's called members at large, which are members or dues-paying members who are not in an area where there's an active chapter and who may or may not start a chapter. One of our statements of purpose, we want to increase the awareness of the total cost of war. War is very expensive in many, many ways. And tonight we'll be talking specifically about climate. We want to restrain our government from intervening overtly or covertly in the internal affairs of other nations, which is quite a big deal, because if you're the country that's running the world, you do that a lot. And it's kind of, we need to quit. We want to resist racism and repression in our home communities. Racism's a huge topic, so I'm not going to say much about it right now. We want to oppose the militarization of law enforcement. The police are becoming increasingly militarized, and in some poor and non-white communities they're becoming more and more an army of occupation. They've got military armored vehicles, tanks, all kinds of stuff. We want to end the arms race and reduce and eventually eliminate nuclear weapons. I think ultimately, as long as there's one nuclear weapon on the planet, there's a possibility that it may go off. And we need to de-arm those and do that. Seek justice for veterans and victims of war. I don't know, as a combat veteran, I can say a lot about that. There's many, many victims of war, and unfortunately, most of them are non-combatants, as we're seeing how things are playing out now, particularly in Gaza and southern Lebanon, but also in the Ukraine and the other wars that nobody talks about in Yemen and the countless wars in Africa. There's people that get dragged into it. Abolish war as an instrument of foreign and international policy. In many cases, war is, for a lot of countries, how to get a business advantage. So we kind of want to end that. And our project, the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, we have 4 areas of focus. U.S. military emissions, report and reduce. Currently, there's no reporting requirements for the military for anything they use. There's also no smog on any of their vehicles. They're exempt from everything. We want to reduce and redirect the military budget to lots of other things, sustainable stuff, climate mitigation. We want climate justice. Most of the people who suffer, I mean, at least in the United States, the most are people in poor and non-white communities because of the way that those communities are situated next to institutions and factories that pollute. And we want peace forever and a livable planet. 3 key points. The military pollutes a lot. The US military spends a lot of money, and you can do something about it. At one time, there was a goal of getting to keeping our safe level of 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide, below that with our emissions, but we passed that in 1990. Though that was a noble goal, but now it's, we're not there. We may not get back there, and there's a lot of sources to that. And we're dealing with global warming, and the global south is most impacted by it. And there are going to be a lot of climate refugees. It's a stream now, but it's eventually, as things become more difficult in the global south due to food scarcity, temperatures, there's going to be more and more pressure for people to leave, and to come north. And that's going to bring on war and all this border stuff that we're seeing now, the locking down of the border. And it's mostly the reason the Democrats aren't really trying hard to stop it. They know that the climate migration is coming, and that it may not be stopped. And there's a lot of wars going on, and those put out a lot of pollution and add to the climate crisis. The war in the Ukraine is responsible for 150 million tons of CO2 emissions, the experts say, and that was in the first 18 months of the conflict. And then there's going to be an additional, because after everything is said and done, eventually you're going to have to rebuild. There's a lot of bulldozers, construction vehicles, all kinds of stuff, laying of roads, that is going to contribute to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases. Similarly, Gaza has had the same effect. And similarly, rebuilding is going to put out more gases. The impacts of the war in Gaza and the Ukraine are kind of listed here, but you can add to those the wars that we don't talk about very often. The war in Yemen, for example, that's been going on a long time. The several ongoing wars in Central Africa that have been going on for a long time. So we have wars, environmental damage, and emissions. We have increased military spending, which equals increased emissions. Both of the wars hinder a united effort to deal with the climate challenge. And there's the additional carbon footprint that's going to be created by rebuilding. And there's no such thing as a green war. War and preparation for war is toxic. This little graphic on the right, the one on the left is of an armored vehicle catching fire. It looks like in an urban environment. This on the right is what's known as a burn pit, which the US military uses. Basically, any solid liquid waste that can be incinerated is incinerated in the open air, and things go out. Toxic substances escape. There's no protection. There are people in my generation, for example, we used a lot of burn pits in Vietnam. we burned everything. There was also a lot of Agent Orange, which is dioxin. There's people in my generation, and I've had several friends and fellow travelers and comrades who have died suddenly, seemingly really healthy, and then all of a sudden some form of cancer kicks in, and they're dead within a year. So the depleted uranium, the thing called PFASs, which is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are a group of chemicals that are used in firefighting foam for airports and air runways. And then there's the mining and of uranium and processing and the production of nuclear weapons that also adds to the pollution level. The United States emits more CO2 than many nations. In fact, if the United States were an independent country, the United States military, were an independent country, they would be 47, 48, 49, something like that. The number kind of goes back and forth from year to year, but it's kind of between 45 and 50, and it kind of stays there. At the time when we first put this out, it was the 47th, but I think it's gone down to the 49th. Since Gaza, we've gone down a little bit. And we have 750 bases in 80 countries. Bases are, like small, what's called a lily pad, that are basically, it might look like a Costco warehouse with a fence around it and said no trespassing, but it's got arms, munitions, medical supplies, food, in case there's a rapid deployment of troops to that area to just pick it up, to large bases where there's housing, hospitals, bowling alleys, movie theaters, power plants, etc. And in 80 countries. And there's a huge concentration of those bases in the oil-rich parts of the world. And the main purpose of the U.S. military is to keep the flow of oil coming into the United States, and make sure that the United States stays in control of the world energy economy. And it's very expensive. It costs a lot of money. This is from 2022, the president's proposed discretionary budget. And you can see that the military directly is over half of that. There's items that could be considered military that are not in that budget. Veterans benefits, anything doing with nuclear carriers or nuclear anything comes under the Department of Energy, not the Department of Defense. A lot of the efforts in Homeland Security are not in this budget, but they're really part of that. So if a more realistic look at what it looks like is it's almost 70%. About 70% of our budget goes into military or militaristic spending, which leaves 31%, for other things, or 69 or 70%, with 31% for everything else. Whoops, what's happening? My slides are going faster. Go back. Okay. And a lot of this is also if you look at the first graphic, this one here, aid to Israel, military aid's not in that. It is in this one, or the Ukraine, or any other place, any kind of foreign things to foreign governments. But it's not like we give them money and they can go out and buy any weapon they want. We don't give them money. We give them credit where they can buy arms from one of these 5 companies. These are the top 5 military suppliers for the United States. It's a number of sales. Whoops, why did that happen? There's a total number of sales there, how much the CEO gets paid, which in every case looks like an exceedingly obscene amount of money. You know, you could feed a small country on that, on some of those, and what their revenues and sales are. But as I said, if the United States says we're going to give you military aid, it's kind of like they give you a debit card that's only good at one of these places. You can't buy it. All these places love it. And it's a matter of priorities. And this is a quote from Martin Luther King. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. And that's what happens. It spends more than 20 times, the US spends 20 more times on the military and on border than it does on climate. Smaller countries spend more than we do on the climate. China and Russia, the European Union, they all spend more than their budget on we do. What they want to do with climate is the carbon tax stuff, which is kind of we just shifted around. It's not like a real solution. Well, we need to start leaving in the ground and figuring out another way to live, which eventually means disarmament completely. It's a matter of priorities. Now, contractors get rich. Guarding the world's oil supply, that's kind of, to me, that's what the US military mainly exists for. Making sure that we have an uninterrupted supply of relatively cheap oil. I think even now, I think our fuel prices for gasoline are still less than what they pay in Europe. But for many years, they were much, much less. And there's things that we could use money to spend on. Climate and clean energy. We could spend $55 billion. We should spend $55 billion a year. Child care and preschool bill. We could spend $40 billion a year on that. The earned income tax for children is $20 billion. Healthcare, we could spend a lot. We could spend $13 billion on that. And on the other side of this equation, all these people are getting rich, except the soldiers who are fighting this war paid very little. And sometimes their families need food stamps to survive. Most polls that were a poll conducted by government of the American Friends Committee said that 56% of adults supporting cutting military spending. There's a lot of things we could do, other things we could do that use that money for more productive use. And it would equally be helpful if we could get everybody else to cut military spending. Then we have the Blue Angels. Each one of these, again, a lot of fuel. Each one of these consumes 7,200 gallons of jet fuel per hour. Like in an hour show of 7 planes, you're talking about spewing 80 metric tons of carbon into the environment. And then you have something like the B-52, which is one of the larger planes. It's not the one that consumes the most fuel. That would be the C-5A, which is a transport, which they can put 3 tanks in that and take it, which consumes more than the B-52. But the B-52 consumes about as much fuel in an hour as an average car driver uses in 7 years. So what we've decided to do in the Veterans for Peace and the Climate Crisis and Military Project is start a no mas campaign. No more military air shows. San Diego has been leading the effort, and we've had a lot of environmental groups join them. We had a thing in Portland, Maine, and Seattle, Washington, and most recently in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And what we've talked about climate and militarism for years and years and years and years, and tried to do something about air shows for years and years and years. And there's a lot of us that have a lot of feelings of frustration, because in San Francisco we protested Fleet Week every year, but it usually falls on deaf ears. And as soon as we started attaching it to climate and air pollution, we're starting to get a lot of organizations to sign on with us. So this campaign is going to keep going, and we'd like other people to join us. If you have a Veterans for Peace chapter in your area and you have an air show in your area, contact us, and we'll help you figure out how to do something and how to contact other people. But anyway, this is what was happened in San Diego after a couple of years. We got this many groups to sign on. There's no dearth of opportunities. In 2024, between the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels, there were 56 air shows in the United States. Each of them burning 7,200 gallons of fuel per hour per plane. And those air shows, sometimes they're as short as an hour, sometimes they're as long as 2 or 3 hours. I mean, it depends on what's going on. And then the Seattle folks have come up with a thing where there's this thing up there called Seafair. They've decided they wanted to demilitarize Seafair, and they're also beginning to get other climate groups to join on to them. Most specifically, we've partnered with 350.org on a national level. So at the bottom, you see our website of this, and we would like you to check out our website. We're veteransforpeace.org, and you go under national projects and you can pull it down. And we've got a lot of downloadable resources. We have these nice bumper stickers, which we will help you get a hold of, these nice bumper stickers. And we have these several brochures that you can download and print about the climate crisis and militarism. And thank you very much. We are stronger together, and it is time that we have priorities that benefit people, not corporate welfare, not the government. There's a rich history of peace and environmental groups doing things, and I hope we can all come together. And thank you very much. And that's kind of the end for me.
Thank you.
And I'd be happy to have any kind of discussion, answer questions or whatever.
Yes, I was going to ask that. There were a couple questions in the chat.
It looks like a lot of questions in the chat.
Well, there's a lot of info.
Okay.
Webb asks, does the discretionary spending slide indicate debt service on loans for past wars?
You know, that's a good question. I'm not sure where the interest on debt goes in all of this. I don't know if it's part of the existing military budget or it's part of the discretionary. I know so Gary, do you have a sense of where that is?
Yeah, it's not included in the Pentagon budget. It's an extra item. And if it's totaled up as well as the other items that are not in the Pentagon budget, the annual bill comes to over 1.3 to 1.5 trillion dollars, which, that starts to add up after a while.
So that's in that other 70% pie.
That's correct.
Okay.
Wow.
I'm realizing that the debt service on loans is not discretionary. So that's why it didn't appear in the discretionary one.
That's probably correct. It's you have to pay the interest on loans.
I have a question on, or are there other questions there, Karen, that you see?
Gary had his hand up. Did you just want to add to that?
Gary, did you want to go before? I
You
did?
know, one of the things I did want to add is that for us, it seems to have been the elephant in the room to talk about the military and what it does and how it adds to the climate crisis. But it's really been by design, going back to, I think it's 1997 at the Kyoto meetings, and the US lobbied heavily to exempt many military emissions from even being reported. And the situation did not improve even at the Paris COP meeting in 2015. Military emissions are still only voluntarily requested to be reported. So, of course, the military hides behind, well, you know, it's on a need to know basis, you know, it's a secret and all of this. So we're relying on estimates. And even with the estimates, it's a tremendous amount that the military produces. But that's one of the reasons most climate folks are not aware that the military is the single largest institutional user of fossil fuels in the world and the single largest institutional emitter of greenhouse gases. That's one unit. I mean, so what we want to do is to help educate people to understand this. And so one of the things we would ask of you is, you're all activists, you're doing great work locally, and we don't expect you to become experts on the military's role. But we would ask you, as activists, you're probably a member of another group or two, whether it be another climate group, a peace group, a church group, a social justice group. Just let us know. We have about 6 to 8 people who are qualified to deliver this presentation, which we've done about 155 times now. So we ask for your help. We're all in this together.
Do you want me to raise my hand like this, Karen?
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Marcia. Sorry,
Well-
I forgot I was doing this.
Sorry. Yeah, I had a question for either Gary or Vince about, I was on, your call, I don't know, a week or two ago about the no more move the money. Can you guys just say something about that? Because I think that, I don't know that, do we have air bases in North Carolina? I don't know if we do. So I don't know if we have these big air shows here, but I'd like for you to just say something about the move the money program that you've been working on.
Well, the Move the Money campaign is an outgrowth of People Over Pentagon, and there are several organizations who have very detailed plans on what to do with that $100 billion. They're calling for a decline in Pentagon spending of over $100 billion. And I will find the link and put it in to the chat about what the I think it's a House bill or a Senate bill that's come up over the last couple of years, but there's a concerted effort to draw attention to this. And the air show is just it's a visible means of how climate people can see the military's pollution and make the connection, because otherwise the military is so gigantic in use. How can you even oppose it? I mean, I'm in San Diego and it's a very militarized town. And when we talk about, protesting the air show, we get a lot of, what do you call it? This is a peace sign, right? if it's just one of them, is that half a peace sign? So it's a matter of education, but it's easy to make the connection with this visible pollution, whether it's at an air show or over a sporting event. It's for entertainment and recruiting. They could get rid of that very easily without affecting, quote, operational readiness.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think move the money is something that some people in Veterans for Peace are part of, but we're not really, it's not really our project like this is. And there's a lot of people involved in that, and maybe Gary will put the link in. I I don't know. I was thinking, you said there's no, I don't know if you have a naval base in North Carolina. I know you got an army base, huge army base, Fort
They-
Bragg.
Yeah, I just don't, maybe anybody else on the call, do you know, do we have a naval or?
There might, it occurs to me that the Army might do some big rollout of tanks once a year, which, you know, when you look at tanks, it's like in a car, it's miles per gallon.
Uh,
In a tank, it's the opposite. It's gallons per mile.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
usually like some of those tanks, it takes like 20 or 30 gallons to go a mile. So I don't know if what they do in North Carolina. I think they have a show in Norfolk, Virginia, and they've got one in Annapolis. You know, in terms of air shows, anywhere where there's Air Force or naval aviation, there's usually an air show.
Yeah, I term the education around the air show and military pollution as the gateway drug to get climate people understanding the military's role in the climate crisis.
I don't know if I like that, Gary.
It's a means of getting people to talk about it.
Anybody else?
Oh. Oh, Catherine. Catherine put Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in
Goldsboro, correct? I was getting
Goldsboro.
ready to say that. Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah. And Vincent Gary, I'm part of 350 also, 350 Triangle. And it's funny, I was pulling together that petition and I saw Gary had it in there at the same time. We were putting it in there at the same time, that petition. But about the air shows. But I know when 350 was kicking this off, like, was it earlier this year? I think that we had a phone call, a Zoom call with Veterans for Peace and others about this. And the air shows that they had, there wasn't anything in North Carolina, so I didn't try to do anything about it. And I don't know how often Seymour or Fort Bragg do air shows, you know?
Right. So the focus would be more on finding other small groups where we could give this presentation and educate people. I mean, ultimately, we want to influence legislatures to make different votes on the military's budget. And in order to do that, we need to improve people's understanding of what the military contributes. You know, we're all in this together, and we can't let them off the hook because they've done successful lobbying in the past. So we are seeing more and more interest in this. During this past year, we saw protests at the Annapolis graduation flyover of the Blue Angels. We saw it in Brunswick, Maine, Toronto, Canada, McMinnville, Oregon, Seattle, Virginia Beach, and then San Diego, and then San Francisco. So next year, I think there's around 60 military air shows scheduled, and we hope to improve on that record that we made this year as well.
I have a question about those big five companies that, you know, that are kind of like the debit card that when they give the quote unquote aid or, military aid. So are those all US companies?
Yes.
Mhm. So I'm sure they're lobbying for,
Oh,
Yeah.
they're in the show me the money. Keep showing me the money. You've been showing it to me for years and don't stop.
I did want to also mention that there is this, many people probably may or may not know that, that Congress has voted like 20 billion more dollars for like these weapons. And Bernie Sanders has these 6 Senate joint resolutions of disapproval. That's because they've already passed. This is the only way to get them to repeal these. And we will try to put information. I don't have it right now. I think Ann said she might put it up on the North Carolina Peace Alliance, basically to, contact your senators and House people to tell them to, vote for this, what's it called? It's called a joint resolution of disapproval. So that'll be after, that'll be sometime in November. I don't know when they'll start voting on these, but there's 6 different resolutions. So yeah, because they're ready to just, give some more money to these guys.
It's funny how they can come up with money for weapons like that, but when it's something for a social program or climate mitigation, there's a fight. You've got to pull teeth to get it.
Yeah,
Right.
they
FEMA doesn't have enough money for North Carolina and Florida, let alone Georgia and South Carolina and Virginia. Yeah.
Well,
And
let's get rid of a few planes next year. Cancel that new carrier.
yeah, I mean, it's amazing. The F-35, the newest jet that the services have, cost over $100 million for
wow.
one jet. And right now it's only operational, I think, about at 55% of the time. And so what the contractors do is they lock in these prices, and then they always have cost overruns, and they've got the Pentagon over a barrel because they can't cancel manufacturing because they need these jets. And so that's why these costs just spiral out of control.
All right.
And
Oh, go ahead.
one last thing. The Pentagon has failed all 6 of its financial audits. Think about that. If it were a company, it would be in deep caca, but they just kind of shrug it off. It's such a big organization, and we, quote, need it.
Yes, the banks would cut them off if they were a private corporation
Right.
or a small business.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been a wonderful discussion. I don't see any other questions, and we are right at 7:30. So Gary and Vince, both, thank you so much. And we will, when we send out our follow-up email, we'll let folks know that you're looking to share this talk with others as well. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
all right. Good night, all.
Hey,
Good night.
Thanks,
Good
Vince.
night.
thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Oh, wait, let me stop the recording.